Is the moon empty? Secrets kept hidden for 60 years. When was the last time you looked at the moon hanging in the night sky, calm and almost domestic like an old friend, and wondered if it is not just a fragment of a planet or a dead satellite, but something more, something much greater than what we are told in textbooks? What if behind its smooth and familiar surface, behind the craters we've seen for millions of years, there lies a structure built not for observation or research, but for something far more massive, such as travel between the stars, for maneuvers that go beyond the limits of our solar system, for purposes that are difficult even to imagine if you are used to thinking of space as a void, rather than a crossroads of ancient and unknown civilizations? Today we are talking not about science fiction or Hollywood scripts, but about a theory that did not arise from nowhere, but from the intersection of real observations, stubborn contradictions in official data, strange anomalies noticed even by Soviet and American scientists, and those moments that still do not fit into the generally accepted picture of the world. A theory according to which the moon is not a natural satellite of the Earth, but perhaps an ancient, artificially created or modified construction functioning as a base for interstellar ships, a recharging point, a repeater, a shipyard area, and maybe even a gateway to other dimensions. You might say this is madness, and perhaps it is, but let us set skepticism aside for a minute and just look at what we know, what we have seen, what has been hidden from us, and why this idea, no matter how strange it sounds at first, becomes less and less absurd the deeper we dive into it. It all started long before man stepped onto the lunar surface, long before the launch of the first satellite, back in the days when astronomers looked through telescopes and noticed strange, inexplicable flashes on the surface of the moon, a phenomenon called lunar transient phenomena, or more simply, sudden lights that disappear in seconds or minutes. These flashes were recorded not once or twice, but hundreds of times in the chronicles of Galileo, in the records of English astronomers of the 18th century, and in the reports of Soviet observers in the 60s of the 20th century. Sometimes these were brief bursts of light, sometimes blurriness as if someone turned on a searchlight on an invisible object, and sometimes strange shadows moving against the expected trajectory. Once, on November 11, 1958, the Soviet astronomer Nikolai Kozyrev, observing the Alphonsus crater, recorded something that still has no clear explanation. For several minutes, the crater began to emit a bright ultraviolet glow, and the spectrum showed the presence of gas, specifically gas and not dust, lava, or steam. And this gas contained hydrogen and carbon. Kozyrev immediately concluded that some kind of activity, possibly emissions, was occurring beneath the surface of the moon. But official science hurried to dismiss this as a meteorite impact, although neither before nor after the event were traces of an impact recorded, and the structure of the spectrum itself did not match known models of meteorite flashes. And yet this was not an isolated case. In 1971, operators of ground tracking stations recorded a strange signal from the lunar surface, originating not from American or Soviet equipment, but from an unknown source located in the area of the Sea of Crises, a signal that in frequency and modulation did not correspond to any known Earth technology of that time, but at the same time possessed signs of artificial origin, as it repeated with periodicity, had a complex structure, and stopped exactly after 40 minutes, as if someone simply turned off the transmitter. What was it? A coincidence? An equipment error? Or is someone or something actually there? And so we come to one of the most disturbing and mysterious facts that neither any official space program nor any independent scientist can explain, no matter how much they try to fit the data into the standard model of the moon as a dead body, namely its density. The moon, as we have all known since childhood, revolves around the Earth. Its diameter is approximately 3,500 kilometers, which is a bit more than a quarter of the Earth's, and its mass is about 1/81st part of the Earth's. But if you take these figures and calculate the average density, you get a value of 3.3 grams per cubic centimeter, which is a full 30% less than the density of the Earth, and even less than other bodies of similar size in the solar system. Why is this strange? Because if the moon was formed as a result of a collision between the young Earth and the hypothetical planet Theia, as the dominant hypothesis claims, then it should have consisted of the silicates of the Earth's mantle, and therefore be at least no less dense than the Earth's crust, or rather even denser given the absence of light water in large quantities. But no, the moon is light. And then came the data from seismic experiments conducted by the Apollo astronauts, and here everything became even more mysterious. When the Apollo 12 module dropped the stage of its rocket onto the surface, the seismometers left on the moon recorded vibrations that lasted for more than 50 minutes, not seconds or minutes, but almost an hour. This is as if you struck a metal bowl and the sound from the blow did not fade for nearly an hour. Compare this with Earth. During an earthquake, energy quickly dissipates in plastic layers, in water, and in the atmosphere, and the tremors stop in a matter of minutes. But the moon rang like a bell. And when in 1972 the Apollo 16 astronauts left an active seismic source on the surface, a small explosive charge, the moon again responded with vibrations that lasted incredibly long. And what is especially strange, analysis showed that at a depth starting about 30 kilometers below the surface, the density suddenly rises sharply, not smoothly like in planetary bodies, but in steps, as if under the crust there is not a mantle but something solid, monolithic, perhaps metallic. One of the leading seismologists of that time, Dr. Gordon MacDonald, who worked at NASA, directly stated that if the moon were a natural body, it would not sound like that. And his colleague, Dr. Robin Bracewell from Stanford University, perhaps put it even more accurately by saying the moon behaves as if it were hollow inside. Yes, you heard right, hollow. Not completely, of course, but with huge caverns, with cavities, with hollow structures that can occupy a significant part of the volume. And if this is so, then what is located there? Air? A vacuum? Or something else entirely? And now let us transport ourselves to 1966, a time when the USA and the USSR were already actively preparing for the first manned flights to the moon, and when, as part of the Lunar Orbiter program, the Americans launched a series of automatic vehicles to photograph the surface in search of suitable landing sites. These images were classified for many years, but when decades later some of them were declassified, amateur astronomers and independent researchers discovered something in certain frames that made many doubt the official version. In the area of the Aristoteles crater, high-resolution images show clear geometric structures, straight lines intersecting at right angles, rectangular formations resembling building foundations or landing pads, and even what some interpret as giant hatches or entrances to underground facilities, dark and perfectly round holes leading who knows where. Particularly famous is the image numbered Lunar Orbiter 38687, where in the shadow of one of the craters, an object resembling a disk or a sphere standing on three supports with a smooth reflective surface is clearly visible, and it does not look like a meteorite or a fragment of rock. NASA's official position is that it is a processing artifact, a glare or a scanning error. But then why are the same artifacts absent from neighboring images taken under the same conditions? Why did Soviet scientists, who analyzed these same images as part of a data exchange, also note unusual structures, which they wrote about in classified reports? And in 1974, after the conclusion of the Apollo program, the Soviet Luna 21 vehicle, which delivered the Lunokhod 2 self-propelled vehicle to the surface, transmitted data to Earth that has still not been fully publicized. But according to leaks published in the 80s in the Space News magazine, it became known that Lunokhod 2 recorded magnetic anomalies that did not coincide with the topography of the surface and local changes in gravity, indicating the presence of massive metallic objects beneath the surface located at a depth of 10 to 30 kilometers. Moreover, these objects were not scattered chaotically, but formed a clear grid as if they were part of a single infrastructure. But even this is not all. For the strongest food for thought comes not from images or sensor data, but from those moments that happened right on the moon, in the presence of people who then kept silent about something, or spoke about it only in hints, or denied it altogether, although their records, their conversations, and their diaries speak of something else entirely. Take, for example, the Apollo 17 mission, the last in history when a man stepped on the moon. Astronauts Eugene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt spent more than 75 hours on the surface, performed 3 exits, and drove more than 35 kilometers in the lunar rover. And in the transcript of the conversations published only in 2006, there is an episode that is officially explained as a technical failure, but sounds much more disturbing. On December 31, 1972, at approximately 0 hours and 20 minutes Greenwich Mean Time, Cernan reports to the Mission Control Center that they see a strange object on the horizon to the southeast of them. It is not moving, but it glows with a dim, yellow-green light like an incandescent lamp under voltage. To this, Mission Control responds by asking to confirm it is not a reflection from the spacesuit or a glare from the sun. Cernan repeats that it is not a glare and that it has a shape, he would say of a flattened egg with 3 protrusions from below, and it hangs over the surface about 2 kilometers away. Then communication is cut off for 2 minutes. When it is restored, Cernan speaks in a completely different voice, saying everything is fine, it was a trick of light, and he apologizes for the false alarm. But the microphone in his helmet remained on, and the recording made by the onboard recorder shows that before this he said to Schmitt not to look there and to just pretend that nothing is there. Why? Why did an experienced pilot, a test pilot, a man who passed a rigid selection, suddenly start lying to Mission Control? Why did he tell his colleague to pretend, and what did they actually see? And yet similar stories exist among other astronauts too. They just talked about it not on the live broadcast, but later, in interviews, in memoirs, and in conversations with loved ones. Edgar Mitchell, the 6th man to step on the moon, in a 2008 interview with a radio station directly stated that we are not alone in the universe, and governments have known this for decades. What he saw there forever changed his understanding of reality. He did not specify exactly what he saw on the moon, but added that after his return, he was summoned to the CIA and advised to keep his mouth shut. Another astronaut, Alan Bean, the 12th man on the moon, and an artist who later painted space landscapes, confessed in one rare interview that once, during a flight around the far side of the moon on Apollo 12, he and Pete Conrad saw something huge standing in a crater, looking like a ship but unlike any earthly one. He said they did not report it, they just watched, and then they agreed that it was a hallucination from fatigue. But why agree on a hallucination? Why not just say, I am seeing double and that is it? No, they agreed. They made up a version. They hushed it up. And there are dozens of such cases. And then there are those who did not remain silent and paid for it. John Lear, an engineer who worked at the Kennedy Space Center in the 60s, claimed to have seen internal blueprints of the lunar module that marked zones where astronauts were strictly forbidden access, not for safety reasons, but because there were devices of unknown purpose installed before the module's assembly. After he spoke about this at a UFO conference, he was fired, stripped of his clearance, and according to him, people in black came 3 times and asked him to forget what he knew. He died in 2022, and 2 weeks before his death, he sent a flash drive with a copy of those blueprints to a friend. The flash drive has still not been found. But let us return to the moon itself, to its structure, to its physics, and to the data that cannot be written off as an error or fiction. In 1998, the Japanese probe Hiten conducted a series of measurements of the moon's gravitational field with unprecedented accuracy, and discovered that in certain regions, especially in the area of the South Pole where bases are now planned to be built and where all space agencies are so eager to go, gravity is not just stronger than average across the surface, but has a focused character, as if it originates not from a distributed mass, but from compact, extremely dense objects located at a depth of about 50 kilometers. These anomalies were called mascons from mass concentration, but to this day there is no convincing geological explanation for their origin. In 2150, the NASA GRAIL mission, consisting of 2 identical probes mapping the gravity field from orbit, confirmed this data and added something even stranger. A giant network of tunnels, or more accurately, cavities, stretching for hundreds of kilometers has been discovered under the lunar surface, some of which connect the largest craters, such as Bailey, Clavius, and Tycho. These cavities are not natural lava tubes because their walls are too smooth, their shape is too regular, and their orientation is too coordinated. And in 2019, the Chinese probe Chang'e 4, for the first time in history making a soft landing on the far side of the moon, transmitted data to Earth that was initially ignored, but then, thanks to analysis by independent scientists from Berlin and Tokyo, caused a real stir. Something was discovered under the landing site in the von Karman crater that reacts to radio waves like metal, and not just like an ore vein, but like a monolithic structure having an internal symmetry similar to a crystal lattice, but with a periodicity 1,000 times greater than any known on Earth. And the most striking thing is that this structure pulses, with a period of 23 hours and 56 minutes, which is a period coinciding with the sidereal day of the Earth. Why? Why does an object on the moon pulse in the rhythm of the Earth's rotation? This could be just a coincidence, but a coincidence so precise and so incredible that it stops being a coincidence and becomes a signal. And here a logical question arises. If the moon really is not just a satellite, but something more, then who built or modified it, and when? The answer given by supporters of this theory sounds fantastic, but at the same time relies on archaeological, mythological, and astronomical data that are not so easy to dismiss. According to one version, the moon was placed in orbit around the Earth about 4 billion years ago, during the very period that geologists call the Late Heavy Bombardment, when a sharp surge of collisions of large bodies occurred in the solar system. It was then that the first signs of water, the first organic molecules, and the first seeds of life appeared on Earth. It is possible that the moon was delivered for stabilization to keep the Earth's rotation axis at an angle favorable for life and to create tides that became a catalyst for the evolution of the first organisms. But then, who could possess the technology allowing for the movement of bodies 3,500 kilometers in diameter? It is unlikely that these were aliens in the usual sense. Rather, it was a civilization that existed in our galaxy billions of years ago, perhaps even before the appearance of the sun. A civilization that used principles of physics that we are only now beginning to suspect. For example, the control of gravity through the geometry of space-time, or the creation of stable wormholes using rotating massive objects. The moon in this model is not just a station, but an anchor. Its inner cavity is not a void, but a space purved to such an extent that energy comparable to the energy of a supernova can be stored there. Or what is even more likely, there is a hyperspatial node, an entry point into a network connecting the stars. This is why interstellar ships, if they exist, use the moon as a transit point, because from there one can enter hyperspace with minimal energy costs using an already created structure, just as sailors used ancient lighthouses. This also explains the strange activity we have observed in recent decades. In 2015, U.S. military satellites recorded a burst of infrared radiation in the area of the lunar South Pole lasting exactly 2 seconds, but of such power that it exceeded the total radiation of all the Earth's volcanoes at the moment of eruption. In 2019, the Indian probe Chandrayaan-2, before crashing, transmitted its last frames to Earth. And in one of them, in the shadow of the Shackleton crater, an object resembling a disk about 30 meters in diameter with 6 symmetrical protrusions along the edge is clearly visible, exactly the size which, according to calculations, is necessary for stabilizing a microsingularity. In 2021, the Chinese station Chang'e 5 brought lunar soil samples from the far side to Earth, and a concentration of the helium-3 isotope 100 times higher than the background was discovered in them. And helium-3 is not just a rare isotope, it is a key component for next-generation thermonuclear reactors. And what is much more important, it is a catalyst in hypothetical antimatter engines that are already being written about in serious scientific journals. Why is it concentrated in exactly one region? Why is it not evenly distributed over the entire surface, as it should be from the solar wind? Because it is being produced there, not mined, but produced, in underground installations operating on principles that we are not yet able to reproduce. And now is the right time to ask the question that perhaps you have been holding in your head for a long time. If all this is true, why does no one speak about it aloud? Why are governments, space agencies, and scientists silent? The answer, alas, is simple. Because acknowledging this fact would destroy not only the scientific picture of the world, but the entire system of values on which modern society stands. Imagine if tomorrow NASA officially announced that yes, the moon is an artificial object, yes, there is a base there, and yes, it is used for interstellar flights. What would happen? Religions would face the need to rewrite sacred texts, philosophies would have to revise anthropocentrism, economies would have to restructure under a new reality where energy, transport, and communication work according to different laws, and political systems? They would simply collapse because all power in the world is built on the inequality of access to knowledge and technology. And if the knowledge that we are not alone and the technology of such a level already exists becomes public, then who will listen to presidents, kings, or general secretaries? This is precisely why information is classified at the highest level, not because it does not exist, but because there is too much of it. That is why after Apollo 17, flights to the moon stopped, not because of a lack of money or a lack of interest, but because someone said enough. That is why now when China, India, the USA, Russia, and Europe are starting the race to the moon again, the emphasis is on the South Pole, not because there was water ice there, although it is there, but because that is where the entrance is. That is where the structure pulses, where gravity focuses, where according to GRAIL data, all the underground tunnels converge. But even here there is something that gives hope, because the world is changing. We no longer live in an era where a few powers can control all information. Today, everyone with a telescope, everyone with image processing software, and everyone with access to open data can see what was previously available only to the elite. People all over the world, from Brazil to Japan, from South Africa to Norway, are filming the moon, analyzing images, and finding new anomalies. In 2024, a group of independent researchers from Toronto, using machine learning algorithms, analyzed all available images of the far side of the moon and discovered more than 150 geometric structures that cannot be explained by natural processes. They published their results in the public domain, and although major media ignored them, the video of the presentation gained 5 million views in a week. This is not conspiracy theory, it is scientific vigilance. It is not faith, it is a demand for evidence. And the more people start asking the right questions, the less it becomes possible to remain silent. Because in the end, it all comes down to one thing: we have the right to know. We, humanity, have the right to know what is on the satellite that revolves around our planet. We have the right to know who or what has been watching us for billions of years. We have the right to know if there is a possibility to go beyond the solar system, not in generations or millennia, but now. And if the moon is not a graveyard of dreams, but a gateway, then our task is not to wait for permission from those sitting in offices, but to raise our eyes to the sky, turn on the telescope, open the archive, ask the question, and not back down until we get an answer. Because the truth, like the light of the stars, cannot be hidden forever. It is only waiting for the moment when someone decides to look not down at their feet, but up to where the moon hangs, quiet, familiar, and perhaps not at all as simple as it seems. So the next time you see it in the night sky, silvery, calm, and almost domestic, do not hurry to look away.
Gaze into it. Take a closer look, because perhaps at this very moment, someone there inside is also looking at us and waiting for us to finally understand that it is time to enter.